Good afternoon. This is the press center of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and here is the weekly update on the situation in the operations area of the joint forces engaged in defeating the Russian armed aggression in the east of Ukraine. Now, the situation on the front line remained largely unchanged in the period from June 18th until June 25th, 2018. Russian occupation forces continued to shell our positions by using the weapons prohibited under the Minsk agreements. Particularly, numerous enemy shellings were registered with the use of main battle tanks and IFVs. Starting from midnight on Monday, June 18th, until the morning of June 25th, the occupation forces fired a total of 44 artillery shells using the 152mm artillery against the defense positions of the joint forces along the whole front line. The enemy forces also launched over 269 mines using the 152 mortars, over 132 mines using the 120mm mortars, and over 147 mines using the 82mm mortars. Also, all of them were fired against the positions of the joint forces along the front line. This is significantly greater if compared with the indicators for the previous week. Enemy fighters were also using tank guns in 41 cases, IFVs in 7 cases, as well as heavy machine guns and grenade launchers. Unfortunately, 1 Ukrainian soldier was killed in action and 12 were wounded in action as the result of direct actions within the operations area of the joint forces. Our hearts go out for the families and friends of the fallen Ukrainian heroes who died while protecting their own motherland. Speaking on the casualties among the enemy forces, well, according to preliminary data of the Ukrainian intelligence, a total of 5 enemy fighters were neutralized by our joint forces. Besides, a total of 9 fighters of the Russian occupation forces were wounded as the result of an accurate response fire of the Ukrainian defenders. The service personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine and other uniformed services under the joint forces provide active assistance and support to civilian population along the demarcation line while holding their defensive positions in the face of Russian armed aggression. An opening ceremony for the reconstruction of the bridge across the Luhanka River took place in the Troitska settlement on June 20th. This reconstruction was done using the military assets. The ceremony was attended by the Joint Forces Commander, Lieutenant General Sergei Naev, as well as the Deputy Head of the Luhansk Regional State Administration, Yuri Klimenko, Head of the Administration of the State Special Transport Service of Ukraine, Lieutenant General Mykola Malkov, as well as representatives of state authorities, local government, and service personnel of the joint forces. The reconstruction was made possible due to a perfect coordination between military units and civil military administrations. The results of the Operation Northern Falcon 2018 were discussed last week in Vinnytsia. The experts from Ukraine and Denmark met in the Officers Club of the Air Forces of Ukraine to discuss the results of the joint Operation Northern Falcon 2018, as well as the prospects for further bilateral cooperation. While drawing conclusions upon the results of the joint operation, both of the parties underlined that the success of the operation, involving a great number of technical complexities, was made possible due to the professional and timely decisions taken by the Ukrainian and Danish airmen, since the weather conditions in Greenland present many challenges for flight operations. The parties were satisfied with the outcomes of the Operation Northern Falcon 2018. Despite the weather challenges and technical complexity, the amount of fuel transported in the course of operation was greater than the outcomes of 10 previous operations. Besides, the total amount of delivered cargo also exceeded the planned expectations. Among the other issues discussed were the conditions and procedure for the next joint Ukrainian-Danish operation, the Northern Falcon 2019. In the end, the Ukrainian and Danish sides thanked each other for the cooperation and expressed their wish for further cooperation. On June 20th, the government approved the strategy for the development of the defense industrial complex of Ukraine until 2028. The main purpose of the strategy is to transform the defense industry and increase its ability to fully sustain the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine, to respond to internal and external challenges, as well as to establish preconditions for the production of weapons and military equipment that could be competitive on the international market. The document consists and considers all the midterm reforms that have already been in progress under the auspices of the state target programs, with account for long-term priorities of national military industrial policy. The strategy initiates the second stage of the reform in the defense industry of Ukraine. Besides, the strategy contains solutions for the development of industrial capabilities in the longer-term perspective. The strategy is designed for a 10-year period, although its major provisions may be reviewed in 2023, as well as in case of significant changes in the economy or strategic priorities of the national policy. On June 21st, the Verkhovna Rada adopted the law of Ukraine on the national security. This decision was supported by 248 deputies. The Legislative Act defines the foundations and principles of national security and defense, as well as the national policy objectives to ensure the protection of every citizen and society as a whole from the threats. The law provides for the delineation of authorities for state agencies involved with the national security and defense, builds a foundation for the integration of policies and procedures of state agencies, as well as other agencies that relate to national security and defense sector, including the security and defense forces. The law also identifies the command, control, and coordination system for operations involving the security and defense forces and sets a comprehensive approach to national security and defense planning, thus ensuring a democratic civilian oversight over the units and structures belonging to the security and defense sector. The law contains 5 sections. Section 1 contains the definition of terms used in the provisions of the law. Section 2 defines the legal framework and principles of national policy in the field of security and defense, as well as the fundamental national interests of Ukraine, including the protection of state sovereignty and territorial integrity, integration of Ukraine into the European political, economic, and legal environment, and membership with the European Union and NATO. The threats to the national security of Ukraine and relevant priorities of the national security and defense policy are identified in the provisions of the National Security Strategy of Ukraine, the Military Doctrine of Ukraine, the Cybersecurity Strategy of Ukraine, and other documents on national security and defense coordinated by the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine and approved by the corresponding decrees of the President of Ukraine. Section 3 defines the principles and mechanisms of civil democratic control, the respective authorities given to the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of power, bodies of local self-government, and civil society. Section 4 defines the composition of the security and defense sector, the legal status of its main components, as well as the command, control, and coordination in the field of national security. The law establishes 4 interrelated components of the security and defense sector in Ukraine. These are security forces, defense industrial complex, citizens and non-governmental associations engaged in the national security process on the voluntary basis. Functions and authorities of the components of security and defense sector are established by the legislation of Ukraine. Section 5 regulates the planning in the field of national security and defense. It identifies the key documents on long-term planning, including the National Security Strategy of Ukraine, the Military Doctrine of Ukraine, the Cybersecurity Strategy of Ukraine, the public security and civil protection strategy of Ukraine, the strategy for the development of military-industrial complex of Ukraine, the National Intelligence Program, as well as the mechanism for their development and implementation in the medium and short-term planning documents. The laws of Ukraine on the foundation of the national security of Ukraine, on democratic civilian control over the military and law enforcement agencies, and on defense planning are repealed. The law of Ukraine on the national security was adopted with account for proposals of the Committee of Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine on the national security and defense. The main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine was hosting an international forum called Black Sea Intelligence Forum. Among its participants were the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, General of Army of Ukraine, Stepan Poltrek, the head of Main Intelligence Directorate, Lieutenant General Vasily Burba, and representatives of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainian delegations was joined by the delegations of the MoD experts representing a total of 4 international countries under the chairmanship of the senior command. The forum was organized in response to a significant deterioration in the global and regional security as the result of aggressive actions on the part of Russian Federation and the need to search for solutions using the joint efforts of other countries in the region together with the leading nations. The participants have discussed the current and potential threats to regional and global security over a number of areas. The aggressive actions of Russian Federation, including the further reinforcement of Russian forces near the borders of Ukraine, as well as on the territory of temporarily occupied Crimea, as well as the escalation of Black and Azov Seas situation, were considered the largest threats to the national security of each of the participating countries and the global security as a whole. The heads of delegations held a number of high-level bilateral and multilateral meetings in the course of the forum. It should be noted that this is the first specialized international event of such level in Ukraine conducted since the beginning of Russian armed aggression against our country. Thank you very much for your attention. This is currently all the information that I have for you.